You have been waiting for this date. After the coldest May fortnight in years, after the snow on Dartmoor, the ice on Norfolk's flatlands, the 13-county warning, the Arctic air that made Britain feel like February had returned, the Met Office has finally given the country what it has been desperate to hear. The warmth is coming. It has a date. And for millions of people in southern England who spent the second week of May wrapped in coats, watching sleet hit their windows, what is about to arrive feels less like a weather forecast and more like a rescue. Mark down May 20th and 21st. That is when everything changes. According to the Met Office's latest extended forecast and corroborating data from netweather.tv and independent analysis published this week, temperatures across southern England will begin climbing from the 20th of May, with the peak warmth arriving on the 21st and holding through the 22nd to the degrees Celsius expected across the southeast peak window, and the real possibility of isolated spots nudging toward 30 degrees if southerly wind conditions align, more favorably than the conservative model runs currently project. This is the warm aftercrop damage from the May cold snap, and it is the opening act of what the Met Office's own 3-month outlook describes as a summer with double the normal probability of turning hot. A summer that some of Britain's most respected independent meteorologists are saying could push all the way back to 40 degrees Celsius territory by July and August. But before we get there, before we get to the sunscreen and the barbecues and the parkside afternoons of May half-term, we need to understand exactly how this warming is going to arrive, which parts of the country get it first, which parts have to wait longer, and what the difference is between a warm spell and an official heat wave. Because those distinctions matter enormously for the 14 million people living in the 14 counties that are about to see the biggest temperature swing of 2026 so far. Start with the mechanics of the incoming warm spell, because they tell you everything about why it will be warm in London and not warm in Inverness on the same day. The Met Office's long-range forecast covering May 15th through to May 24 uses careful but clear language. It describes changeable and at times rather unsettled conditions dominating through the middle part of May. That is the continuation of the cold and disturbed pattern that has been in place since the beginning of the month. But then the forecast pivots. As the period progresses, the Met Office says high pressure is likely to begin building from the south, bringing more in the way of settled weather. Temperatures likely cooler than average to begin, but tending to recover as the period progresses. And then the phrase that every meteorologist in Britain has been watching for, perhaps becoming rather warm by the end of the period, especially in the south. In Met Office communication language, rather warm is not a throwaway phrase. It is a specific probabilistic descriptor that signals the forecasting team's confidence that warmth above the seasonal average is the most likely outcome for that period. And the end of that period lands squarely on May 20th through 25th. The specific temperature progression that the data shows is worth walking through day by day, because the detail reveals something important about the nature of this particular warm spell. The evening of May 20th is when the change first becomes tangible across England. Temperature maps from netweather.tv show the mercury climbing to around 20 degrees Celsius across England and the Midlands during the evening hours of the 20th. A striking contrast to the single-figure temperatures that the same areas were recording barely a week earlier during the Arctic blast. That 20-degree reading on the evening of the 20th is not the destination. It is the start of the ramp. By the evening of May 21st, the maps show areas around London and Surrey hitting 23 degrees Celsius. And that is evening temperature, not afternoon peak. Daytime highs on the 21st across the warmest southeastern locations are expected to reach 24 to 27 degrees, with the very warmest enclosed valleys and urban heat island zones in London, Kent, and Essex potentially approaching 28 degrees on an optimistic run. The warmth then holds and potentially intensifies through May 22nd, 23rd, and into the 25th, before any significant cooling signal appears in the models. The 14 counties that independent the hottest in this May warm spell stretch across a now familiar geographic arc, the southeastern crescent of England that consistently sees the highest temperatures during southerly warm spells because of its distance from the moderating Atlantic, its proximity to the continent, and in London's case the urban heat island effect that adds 2 to 5 degrees of additional warmth on top of whatever the surrounding countryside is recording. London sits at the top of the warmth rankings. Surrey, Essex, and Kent cluster immediately behind it. Then the Midlands, Birmingham, Coventry, Nottingham, Leicester, will finally thaw out after a brutal second week of May and see temperatures climbing into the low to mid-20s during the peak days. Yorkshire, which was dealing with snow warnings less than 2 weeks before this warmth arrives, is forecast to see highs in the high teens to low 20s. Not summer-level heat, but a recovery so dramatic from what came before that it will feel like a different climate entirely. Wales gets into the mix too, with the south and east of the country seeing genuine warmth, though the western coast facing the Atlantic will remain cooler and cloudier than the inland and southeastern areas. The question that everyone from casual weather watchers to professional meteorologists is asking right now is whether this May warm spell will officially qualify as a heat wave. This matters more than semantics, because an official heat wave declaration from the Met Office triggers a cascade of health system responses: NHS heat health alerts, social care check-in protocols for vulnerable residents, local authority cooling center, activations, and public communications about heat risk. The official definition in England is clear. An official heat wave is declared when a location exceeds its threshold temperature, which varies by region, with London's threshold at 28 degrees Celsius, for 3 or more consecutive days. That threshold was set specifically for health impact reasons, reflecting the temperature at which excess mortality statistics historically begin to show. A statistically significant rise above baseline. For the May 20th to 25th warm spell, the critical question is whether London and the South East can sustain temperatures at or above 28 degrees for at least 3 consecutive days, or whether the spell peaks at 27 and then retreats. The honest current answer is that this is on the borderline of the official heatwave threshold. Whether it crosses that line depends on how firmly the high pressure establishes itself from the south, and whether any Atlantic disturbances push in from the west to clip the warm spell before it can consolidate. The Met Office's rather warm language carefully stops short of a heatwave declaration, but the forecasting community is watching this window extremely closely. What is not in doubt is that for families across England and Wales planning May half-term activities, the window from the 20th to the 25th of May represents the best outdoor weather the country has seen since the brief warmth at the start of the month. 4 days of high temperatures, sunshine, and conditions that genuinely justify the word warm after everything May has thrown at the country so far. The timing is notable. May half term in England and Wales falls in the final week of May. Precisely the window that the forecast is identifying as the warmest. The economic implications of that timing are real and significant. The tourist industry, the hospitality sector, garden centers, outdoor venues, beach resorts, and national parks all experienced their first major revenue peak of the summer season during May half-term. After a cold and weather-disrupted first half of May that severely dented outdoor spending, a warm half-term week arriving exactly on schedule would represent a meaningful recovery in the discretionary spending that these industries depend on. Beyond the immediate half-term warm spell, the longer-term summer forecast context is what truly distinguishes 2026 from a normal year. The Met Office's 3-month seasonal outlook for May through July 2026 assigns a 40% probability to a hot summer. That number needs unpacking because it can sound modest. 40% is less than even odds after all, but the base rate matters enormously for context. The climatological probability of a hot summer in Britain, calculated from the historical frequency of summers that fall in the hottest third of the historical distribution, is approximately 20%. It is 20% by definition because 1/3 of all historical summers are in the warmest third, and rounding to 2 decimal places, that is roughly 33%. But the Met Office's specific probability framework for hot versus near normal versus cold categorization places the baseline around 20% for the hot category in a neutral climate. When the Met Office says 40% probability of hot, they are saying their model ensemble is producing hot outcomes at double the climatological base rate. That is a substantial and statistically meaningful departure from normal. Independent forecaster Jim Dale of British Weather Services goes considerably further in his language than the Met Office's institutional caution permits. His assessment published this week was unambiguous. By July and August 2026, he said, the UK could find itself back in territory where there is a fair chance of seeing another 40 degrees Celsius. The mechanism he identifies is straightforward. A heat dome establishes over Spain and continental Europe, as it has in 2019, 2022, and other recent extreme summer events. The high pressure associated with that European heat dome extends northward and provides the atmospheric highway for superheated air to push from the Iberian Peninsula, across France, across the English Channel, and into England's southern counties. The 2022 event that produced 40.3 degrees Celsius at Coningsby in Lincolnshire followed exactly this pathway. Temperatures in Spain and Portugal exceeded 45 degrees Celsius in the days before the UK record was broken. The air that reached Lincolnshire had been baking over the Iberian interior for several days before it crossed the Channel. If the same setup occurs in summer 2026, the background temperatures are higher because the climate system has continued warming since 2022. The continental source region temperatures are higher, the pathway temperatures are higher. The outcome, if the atmospheric geometry aligns, would be higher still. The Super El Niño developing in the Pacific Ocean is the wildcard amplifier behind the summer 2026 heat forecast that most public weather discussion has not yet fully absorbed. Independent forecasters specifically flagged this week that El Niño is likely to develop during early summer 2026, and that even in its early stages, its influence on the Azores high, the semi-permanent area of high pressure sitting over the eastern Atlantic that is the primary driver of European summer heat waves, is expected to be measurably positive. A stronger, more northward displaced Azores high means more persistent blocking of Atlantic weather systems from reaching Britain during summer. More blocking means more sustained dry and hot conditions. ECMWF and NOAA models are projecting the El Niño to intensify toward the super El Niño threshold, sea surface temperature anomalies above 2 degrees Celsius in the central Pacific during the August to October window. As that intensification progresses through summer, its downstream influence on European atmospheric circulation grows. The summer of 2026 is not just happening in the context of a normal background climate. It is happening in the context of a climate already running at record warmth, with a super El Niño developing that will amplify the Azores high exactly during the months when Britain's most severe heat events historically occur. There's a specific atmospheric mechanism that determines whether the incoming May warmth evolves into the kind of sustained summer heat that Jim Dale and the Met Office Seasonal Outlook are flagging, and it is worth understanding clearly. The mechanism is called the North Atlantic Oscillation, or NAO. In its positive phase, the NAO produces a strong westerly flow across the North Atlantic, pushing Atlantic storm systems across Britain and keeping temperatures moderate through the summer. In its negative phase, the westerly flow weakens, high pressure builds over the eastern Atlantic and Europe, and the pathway for hot continental and subtropical air to reach Britain opens up. The NAO's behavior through June and July is the single most important atmospheric signal for determining whether the warm spell beginning May 20th evolves into a summer of record heat or dissipates back into the unsettled, changeable pattern that has dominated May so far. The super El Niño developing in the Pacific has a documented statistical tendency to push the NAO toward its negative phase during summer, which is precisely the configuration that would connect the incoming May warmth to the kind of July and August heat that breaks records. The drought risk that accompanies the incoming warm spell is something that the Environment Agency, National Farmers Union, and water utility operators are watching alongside the temperature forecast. England entered May with a soil moisture deficit in many agricultural regions following a dry April. The Arctic blast of May 12th to 13 brought some rainfall with its precipitation systems, but the total amounts were modest across much of southern and central England, enough to wet the surface, but not enough to recharge soil moisture or groundwater at the levels that an extended warm and dry period requires as a buffer. When the high pressure builds from May 20th and the warm spell consolidates, it will be bringing not just heat, but dryness. The high pressure, by definition, suppresses rainfall. If the warmth from the 20th connects seamlessly into a June and July dominated by the kind of Azores high, blocking that the El Niño signal and the seasonal forecast both suggest, England's agricultural regions face the prospect of their second consecutive dry summer following the drought stress of 2025. Water companies in southern and eastern England, the regions with the structurally tightest water supply margins in the country, are already monitoring reservoir and groundwater levels and modeling scenarios in which above-average summer temperatures combine with below-average summer rainfall to create water resource pressures that trigger use restrictions ahead of the 2026-27 winter recharge season. The health system preparation for the incoming warmth is a dimension that the NHS and local authorities are already beginning to mobilize. The UK Health Security Agency's cold weather alerts that were issued during the Arctic blast of May 12th to 13, flagging health risks to elderly people, young children, and those with cardiovascular conditions from unseasonable cold, are being replaced by the preliminary planning stages for heat health alerts. The transition from cold health risk to heat health risk within the same fortnight is itself an unusual event that reflects the extraordinary volatility of May 2026's weather. NHS trusts in London, the South East, and the Midlands are reviewing their heatwave response protocols, ensuring that cooling packs, hydration guidance, and vulnerable patient outreach programs are ready to activate if the May warm spell intensifies toward the official heatwave threshold, or if the longer-term summer forecast materializes as the models suggest. The 2022 heatwave produced approximately 2,800 excess deaths in England over its duration, a figure that prompted a comprehensive review of NHS heatwave readiness and significant investment in heat health response infrastructure. That infrastructure will be tested again in 2026 and possibly tested harder than 2022 if the summer evolves as the most concerning forecasts project. For the millions of people whose experience of May 2026 has been framed by the extraordinary cold of its first 2 weeks, the arrival of warmth from the 20th carries a meaning that goes beyond weather. It is the permission to believe that summer is real, that the season is turning, that the coats can go back in the wardrobe and the garden chairs can come out, that permission is earned rather than assumed this year, in a way that it rarely is in British springs that proceed more smoothly from cold to warm without a detour through snow on Dartmoor and ice in Norfolk. The warmth arriving from May 20th is the release after one of the most sustained atmospheric pressures this country has experienced in May in modern memory. But the experienced weather observer looks at the incoming warmth and sees not just relief, but a setup. The high pressure building from the south that delivers the May 20th warmth is the same high pressure pattern that, if it intensifies and persists through June and July as the El Niño and Niño signals suggest it could, becomes the architecture of the summer's most extreme heat events. The warmth arriving at half term is the door opening. What comes through that door over the following 2 months, whether it is a pleasant, warm but manageable British summer or something that pushes toward the kind of temperatures that require a new chapter in the UK's extreme weather record books, depends on how the atmospheric dice fall in the weeks ahead. The forecasters have put their probability assessments on the table. The models have shown their hands. The date is confirmed. May 20th is when it begins, where it ends, how hot this summer gets, how many records fall, how close to 40 degrees the thermometer climbs by August, is a story that is still being written in the Pacific Ocean, in the Azores High, in the temperature of the air sitting over the Sahara right now. But it begins, unmistakably and with growing confidence in the forecast data, on the 20th of May 2026. After everything this month has thrown at Britain, the warmth has an arrival date. And it is almost here.